Thank you, and welcome to the Travel, Recreation, Wildlife, and Cultural Resources Committee meeting. We're going to start with start with roll call, I guess. And we'll leave that open. I believe Representative Storr is getting lunch. So.
Okay. Representative Angelos?
Here.
Representative Burkhart?
Here.
Representative Byron?
Here.
Representative Larson?
Here.
Representative Singh?
Here.
Vice Chairman Western? Representative Winter? Madam Chair Newsom?
Here.
And you, I gotcha. Gotcha. Thank you.
So we will go ahead with the first Senate file on our agenda is Senate File 128. I do not see Senator Hicks here. I'm sure he's on his way, but if we have someone from State Lands, that would be perfect if you would kind of run us through this bill.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair.
So if you could state your name, and obviously you're with State Land, so.
Thank you. Jason Crowder, Deputy Director for the Office of State Lands and Investments. The bill is relatively straightforward. It cleans up some relatively old language or the old way of doing things and brings it up to current practice. Historically, the bill or the statute required that any land transaction done with the federal government would be on an acre for acre basis. This simply moves that from an acre basis to a value for value basis, and that's already codified in existing statute 36-1-111. So we simply remove the acre for acre reference and point any criteria for an exchange with the federal government to the guiding principles that the legislature has already given the office in 36-1-111. Happy to answer any questions.
Any questions from the committee? Vice Chairman Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Crowder, assuming I'm reading this correctly, just kind of says, obviously, you receive land via patent at the inception of our state, but this is the way I read it's going kind of the other way around, that if we're trying to take state lands, we want to exchange, or trying to take federal land, we get to have that criteria, and this broadens the criteria, which we get to pick what federal land we want in exchange. Am I understanding that correctly, Mr. Crowder?
Mr. Crowder.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, that's correct. It would be the normal process for us to do a land transaction, that we get to do the analysis of the federal lands and get to be a part of that selection. It's not just whatever they're pushing upon us. The state gets to actually agree to that as well.
Madam Chair, follow-up.
Follow-up.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Crowder, perhaps I'm just not aware, but maybe for the edification of the committee, how often does this process happen where we're swapping that land with the feds? I know obviously there's been some chat around what we have in Teton County, but just talk about the frequency of this happening.
Mr. Crowder.
Madam Chair, Representative Western, it doesn't happen a lot, which is why this statute hasn't been updated in quite some time. We've had a lot of conversations with the federal government on ways we could create an ownership pattern that may make a little more sense across the state of Wyoming, clean up some of the checkerboards and some management issues. This is the one that's actually gotten a little bit of traction that I'm going to speak to, and it's one in the Medicine Bow National Forest. So we're getting down the road in the process far enough that it looks like there might be a light at the end of the tunnel, that we could complete it. And when we did a review of the analysis and preparation, or a review of the statutes in preparation of writing the detailed analysis, we found this anomaly. The lands we're looking at in that case, the state lands, are likely much less valuable on a per acre basis than the federal lands we would acquire, meaning that we would probably get a lot less federal acres than the state lands disposed of. So we wanted to make sure that if we are going to do what the intent of that transaction is, which is increase manageability of state land, increase revenue generating ability, and work with the Water Development Office for development of a reservoir to help irrigators downstream, we needed to have a value for value scenario. So this, Representative Western, to answer your question, doesn't happen often at all. In fact, the first time in my tenure with the office.
One more.
One more follow-up. Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Mr. Crowder, you said this is in regards to an exchange in the Medicine Bow National Forest. Could you maybe just describe that one a little bit more and where it is?
Absolutely, Madam Chair.
Mr. Crowder.
Representative Western. It's an exchange that is outside of, it's a little south and west of the town of Saratoga. There are a lot of isolated state parcels within the forest boundary over in that area that abut very steep and rugged topography, as well as wilderness areas, and then federally designated roadless areas. That creates a management nightmare for us, or a management hurdle anyway, as far as trying to manage the timber on those parcels for revenue generating potential. And then if we want to increase any recreational component or anything else, those tracks are extremely limited in their potential. The Water Development Office has been working for quite some time to create a reservoir in this area to allow for normal irrigating regimes that may help in years of drought and all of the other reasons that they would have that I don't fully understand. But they've tried to work with the federal government to place this reservoir on federal lands and have run into hurdles there. So it seems like the best way forward for them to get the reservoir built is if the state owned the property, and that we would issue an easement to them for them to have the water impoundment structure on state lands. That's where we were brought in to see if we can't own the property underneath there. We already know we have a management issue with the scattered state lands within the forest boundary. So it was the intent that we could try to effectuate an exchange with the federal government to allow an opportunity for that reservoir to be built. We're very early in these stages. The federal government is going through their NEPA process, and Senator Hicks can talk more to that end. But we have just essentially provided an exchange in concept to the Board of Land Commissioners that this is the conceptual structure of the exchange. Here are some parcels that we would like to create a better management opportunity on. And depending on how the Forest Service and the NEPA process all works and goes forward, our exchange will get a little bit more tailored to the specific outcome.
Thank you, Mr. Crowder. Any other questions? Mr. Burke, or Representative Burkhart?
Thank you, Madam Chairman. So, Mr. Crowder, then this bill is aimed at one particular exchange, am I correct, from what you said?
Mr. Crowder?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, it's a result of one exchange. We've not had the opportunity to really dig into statute because we've not gotten this far down the road with an exchange with the federal government. This will benefit other transactions with the federal government if they appear, but it's just because we've gotten this far down the administrative process that we're asking or noticing a conflict in the statute.
Follow up.
Representative?
So, Mr. Crowder, give me an example. I mean, how many acres are we trading for how many acres, and what's the value of those acres?
Mr. Crowder?
Madam Chair, right now it's still conceptual, as I've mentioned, so there's a lot of acres that are up in the air for analysis. Before we come down on a specific acreage, we need to go through that analysis. Part of it is the valuation. We haven't started that yet, so we don't know what the value is, but at a very high level, it's somewhere around 7,000 acres in total, but that will certainly decrease as we start understanding more about the parcels.
Follow up. So in that valuation, are you considering minerals, scenic value, wildlife habitat, all of those issues?
Mr. Crowder?
Madam Chair, Representative Burkhart, we haven't begun our analysis, but part of it is to consider those things. The Forest Service does the first step in its analysis. It's called the feasibility study. And that is exactly what you just talked about. How are all those attributes impacted by the transaction? Is it even feasible for them from a public good standpoint to move forward?
Thank you.
Any other questions from the committee? Senator Hicks, would you like to weigh in on this, or?
For the opportunity to testify today before your committee. Madam Chairman, this has implications for any future or ongoing transfer. This brings it into conformance with what we currently do for private to private. It's a value for value basis. We just have not done a federal land exchange in quite some time, so this just brings this into conformity with what we currently do if you're trading state lands for private lands. Madam Chairman, specific to the issue, as I think Deputy Director Crowder laid it out, it's kind of being driven by this. But irregardless whether a reservoir was or was not constructed, it's still in the best interest in the state to consolidate our state land into manageable components. This is part one of a two-phase land exchange with the Medicine Bow National Forest. So there's a larger land exchange that was conceptually put together, which is about a total of 14,000 acres. This is a subset in there. Even if there was never authorization to construct a storage facility. This is still inherently in the best interest of the state because many of a number of the parcels we're looking at do not drive a very high rate of return revenue, primarily timber. We can't get to them. There's one parcel out there that it's adjacent to a wilderness area that it costs $4 or $5 million just to put a bridge and get to that. If we do the land exchange there, it would allow the state to, the one that we're conceptually looking at, to be able to have merchantable harvestable timber off of that parcel instead of isolated parcels that we can't even get to that currently derive a very small amount of revenue for grazing leases. This provides more opportunity to meet what the purpose of the state lands were for, is to generate the highest rate of return for the public school systems.
Thank you, Senator. Any questions for the senator? No, I hope you don't mind that we started without you.
No, I'm glad you did. Madam
Apologize for
Chairman.
that. Any other public comment on this particular bill? Seeing none? What would the committee like to do? Moved by Larson. Seconded by Singh. Any comments from the committee? Any questions? Sensing that you're ready to vote? Barb, would you please call the roll?
Representative Angelos,
Aye.
Representative Burkhart,
Aye.
Representative Byron,
Aye.
Representative Larson,
Aye.
Representative Singh,
Aye.
Representative Storer,
No.
Vice Chairman Western.
Aye.
Representative Winter.
Aye.
Madam Chairman Newsom.
Aye. Thank you.
8 aye, 1 no.
Thank you for that. Next bill will go to is Senate File 92, and it looks like we have a lot of folks in the room. I want to remind everybody in the room that we have a short time. We have to be back in an hour and a half into the House chambers. And so I would encourage you, if you're here to Senator Case, come on up. If you're here to testify, that we're going to keep testimony to about 2 minutes. And I would appreciate it if somebody else has already said what you would like to say, that maybe you opt not to testify. So if you have new information or something else, we have 17 people online to testify on this. So we're just going to have to move through it pretty quickly if you want us to act on the bill today. Senator Case, welcome.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman.
So if you would like to take us through your bill.
You bet. And Madam Chairwoman, with your leave, I'd like to discuss a little bit of the background first. I don't know if you know this, Madam Chairwoman, but I'm a utility economist, and at the University of Wyoming, for PhD in economics in those days, you had to have 2 fields, and I chose the field of public utility economics and resource and environmental economics. And I left the university before I finished my dissertation, but I finished my dissertation while I was employed by the Illinois Commerce Commission. That's sort of like our Public Service Commission, except for it's a really big agency. It's the second largest utility regulatory commission in the country. And so since then, I've consulted all around the world for, I finished my PhD back there while I was working for the agency. And I remained with the agency and became the director of policy for the agency. And then I returned to the Lander. And so after that, I had a consulting career and spent some time. I still consult to on projects around the world in environmental and utility areas. I work a lot for U.S. government agencies and the World Bank on utilities overseas. And a very huge concern in the utility world is that the finances of the utility are sustainable, and especially of concern to our U.S. agencies that provide. We often are in a situation where we're helping to improve and electric, gas, or water utilities overseas, but they don't have rates that make it sustainable. And so I'm involved in the rate process usually to try to help them develop a system that will pay for itself and will be fair to all the customers. There's a standard of rate making in public utility world that's called just and reasonable. And that's the standard by which utilities are supposed to do rates. You know, a lot of people don't like utilities. They are a common thing that people like to get angry about. But utilities are regulated, and they're regulated by the government through the public service commissions. I'm talking about investor-owned utilities, but also some other utilities too. And that regulation makes it a requirement that these utilities perform certain things. But it also means, Madam Chairwoman, that the policies with respect to utilities, they rely on everyone kind of doing their part. Utilities are decreasing cost in industries. And we all benefit when we're connected to the utility because we achieve lower common costs. We all have to share in the cost of the utility. And that's a fundamental tenet of regulation. And that's what they try to achieve. So a lot of people think when we pull one over on the utility or we have special rates for one class of customers, that the utility pays for that. But because of the factor of regulation, Madam Chairwoman, and the rates are set by the utility to collect the costs of providing the service, the rates have to come from someone else in the utility. It's not a zero-sum game. So that is the basis of making utilities sustainable. Now overseas, you see lots of shenanigans about rates. They want to have free services for some things or discounted services for things. And it ends up destroying the financial viability of the utility. We're in a great era of transition with utility service. We're moving towards different ways of generating. We are moving towards what's called distributed generation, where we're putting more production resources in the network itself. In that process of moving, it's very important that we be fair to all the customers. And that's what this bill is trying to do, Madam Chairwoman. Back in the late 1970s, the United States government had a policy, and it remains in effect today, that encouraged the use of renewable and production of electricity with renewable resources on the grid. It also required utilities to purchase that production. But it's also important for the long-term sustainability of utilities that be a fair arrangement. And I'd submit to you that if the arrangement is unfair, we can never get to where we need to be with renewable energy and a green energy future. And here's partly why. In the utility world, typically you pay two rates. You have a monthly charge to connect to the utility, and then you pay a kilowatt hour charge in electric utility for energy. And you might think, well, the monthly charge covers the fixed cost of the utility and the energy charge covers the cost of energy. Unfortunately, that's not entirely true, and it's mostly not true. Another characteristic of utilities is that they have a huge amount of fixed costs, and the fixed costs are more than the operating costs. And so what the common practice in the electric utility industry has been is to recover a small portion of the fixed costs with the monthly charges. You, depending on where you are and who your electric provider is, my electric provider is Rocky Mountain Power. Their monthly fee is about $20. I think it's either $20 even or slightly more than that. And that is in part designed to recover some of the fixed costs of the system, but it's also covers cost of billing and things like that, but it only covers about one third of the fixed cost of the system. This is an important piece of this to remember. Other utilities are the same. That means in your kilowatt hour charge, your hourly charge, it's inflated in order to collect more of that fixed cost. And are you following me? I hope you're following me. So it's, you pay too much per hour and too little for the monthly connection. We all do this, and all utilities have this rate structure, and the reason is it helps to make it more affordable for very small users and poor users that don't use much electricity. So they get a lesser rate and they don't contribute much to fixed costs. But then large users probably overpay the kilowatt hour charge. So they contribute proportionally more of the fixed costs. But in a lot of ways that's appropriate because larger users rely more on the fixed cost of the system, the capacity, the transmission, the generation, all of these things. So here's the problem we have with the way that we currently compensate small electricity producers. And these are homeowners or small business, and they produce either with wind or solar, and they are called net metering customers now. And what that means is the amount of electricity they produce offsets the electricity they buy. Let me give you a typical example, or a made-up example. I don't know how typical it is, but say in my first month, let's call that month June. Okay, I have a solar installation, and I'm on a net metering basis with the utility, so that I produce a lot. June is sunny. It's the first time in summer, and maybe I produce 200 hours of electricity, 200 kilowatt hours. And maybe I have to buy from the utility 100 kilowatt hours. But over the course of the month, I have produced more than I've consumed. There's no charges going back and forth. It's the meter nets it out. So I end up having a credit with the utility of 100 kilowatt hours. Maybe the next month, the same thing happens, and I get another 100 hours credit. Then we get to the fall, and maybe we get to winter. Maybe my production of electricity is not as much as it was with the solar installation. If I have wind, I could be making more in the winter. Now I have to rely on the utility to provide more than I'm producing. So it eats away at my bank, okay? Now I'm using 200, but only producing 100. And you can see that eventually it evens out. But the compensation that I receive is at the retail rate because I give the utility, it offsets my demand at the retail rate. Now, if you think about it, you could have a very large customer, and over the course of the year, and you get to the end of the year, maybe there's a net, they've had used lots of electricity, but they've produced lots of electricity. And in the end, maybe the net bill is close to zero. It's very possible. But when they needed the electricity, they relied on the system in a very, very big way. Okay? Perhaps it was in winter nights when the wind wasn't blowing and they needed, and it's a peak time for the utility, and they needed that energy to heat their home. Very typical. So the disconnect between, the consequences of that, when we get to the end of the year, this very large customer who's relied on the utility a lot may only be making a contribution to fixed cost of the $20 per month because the other costs are all netting out. Are you following me? Okay. So this bill, that works for a while. That works if I'm looking at all of you, and I think that Senator Byron, or Representative Byron, he's the first guy to put renewable energy at his home. So he's the first guy to do that. And he pays less fixed costs towards the common good than everybody else. Well, that's not really a problem. There are 9 of us, right? And we reshuffle again, so the 8 of you pick it up. But then Representative Burkhart, he's got a green heart, and he goes next. Now, say they're both netting out at not contributing, only contributing 1/3 of the fixed costs. Now you guys have got to cover it. This is what's happening as the penetration of rooftop solar and small customer cogeneration or generation proceeds in our grid. This is a problem that will manifest itself in rate increases for everyone else. Because like it or not, both those two gentlemen, as nice as they are, they're still going to need electricity from the grid. And their peak demand from the grid is probably not affected by what they're doing. So they're going to rely on the grid on the coldest day in winter when the wind isn't blowing and they've got their electric cars plugged in, maybe more than you guys are, but they're avoiding the fixed costs. That's what this bill's about. You're going to hear testimony that from people that are going to say things like, well, you're kind of right theoretically, but this is de minimis. It's less than 1%. And what there are enormous tax and other advantages and there are incentives. Within the city of Cheyenne, the penetration of solar is growing. It's a small amount. It's less than 1%, but it's growing at double-digit rates. And there are plenty of people involved in the installation in the industry. And so I realize that we have to be fair to people that have made really significant commitments to purchase these installations. Some of these aren't cheap at all. You know, there are thousands of dollars that people have expended for these facilities. And their hearts are pure. They believe that they're doing something good for the planet and the environment. And because of that, we should recognize that. I think they are doing some good things, but I think we have to understand a little bit, Madam Chairwoman, whereas some states have deliberately passed laws that say we are committing as a state to more renewable power, and we are going to do that through either the utility system or through tax things. And they've made a moral and pledge to that. Wyoming has never done that. We have never said things like there should be a renewable portfolio standard or that we should encourage more renewables at the residential level. So this is a bit problematic in that as this grows, it hurts other customers. It doesn't hurt the utility. They always go back and by law, they're allowed to get a rate of return. If they aren't permitted to earn their rate of return, that they can go to court and claim that their property was confiscated because shareholders devote their property to the public good. What this bill does, Madam Chairman, in an effort to be fair to everyone, it says anybody that has a system that's installed anytime before July 1st, 2024 is grandfathered for 15 years. 15 years on the net metering basis. That's a long time. That's a long time that's very fair to people that have made these commitments. But it says to be fair to other customers, we need to figure out a new arrangement. But the legislature's not smart enough to do that. And it's too political. It's way too political. And I know you've heard a lot of emails, and you'll notice that I'm the only sponsor on this bill because I didn't want to drag anybody else through this. You know, I've taken hell for this, Madam Chairwoman. I apologize for the language. And I knew it because this has been a joint interim bill of the Corporations Committee. It has passed the Senate before, and it never made it out of the House. So I decided to take this on. It's the same bill, same concept that we had before, but I extended the sunset from 10 years to 15 years to make it more fair. And I have provided for the same requirements that the Public Service Commission come up with the rates as we go forward. We made a great change in the Senate, the bill. And so if you look at the engrossed bill, the standard by which the Public Service Commission would derive rates for future installations, that ones that happened after July 1st, 2024, is just and reasonable. This is the rate standard that is their mantra. It is the rate standard that the courts have upheld. And so I'm not trying to put my thumb on the scale. I'm just saying, we know we've got a problem with the existing situation. Grandfather them in, get the new rates over to the Public Service Commission so that a fair, a just and reasonable fair rates can be determined for all customers. That's all this bill does. Now, it's important to remember that as we move forward, I think things will change. As storage opportunities, I mean, batteries are more prevalent with respect to these home generation situations, they could become, in peak periods, more assets to the grid and less liabilities. That's going to depend on the situation that they have, but they might be able to help reduce the peak in the future. It's possible. It's not happening now. It's not even close. And since people that have these power producing capabilities also tend to have electric vehicles, you have a compounding problem in that they're charged mostly at night. Wind doesn't necessarily blow at night. Obviously, solar is not very powerful. So far, they are heavy demanders of the grid support. But so that's the whole thing for the bill.
Senator, thanks for the overview.
Yeah,
And would you mind just going through the bill with us?
you bet. And I do want to, so Madam Chairwoman, the new language is on 3716-105. Language is created to read. And Madam Chairwoman, in the bill title, I do want to point out, I brought an amendment to lines 4 through 6. And I have that amendment to pass out. It changes the title to reflect the charge of the commission with respect to just and reasonable rates. So, but the created language is 3716-105 is created, and where we talk about how these home generators and small commercial generators are compensated. The very first paragraph establishes that, and by the way, as by way, one last piece of background, we changed the name to customer generator. And the reason is because net metering is a clanky kind of definition in the existing law. Right now, it means a physical process of connecting to the grid with rooftop solar or wind generation, but it also means the compensation mechanism that I talked about where we net out. So we're changing the definition of the installation, the physical installation, to small customer generator. The compensation mechanism that is grandfathered is net metering. That's what this is, Part A does. And it says, except as provided in subsection B and C of this section, no electric utility shall be obligated under this article to compensate any small customer generator for any electricity produced on a net metering arrangement under this article. A small customer generator that is producing electricity on a net metering arrangement under this article that is first operational before July 1, 2024, over a year away, shall be considered an existing customer and shall be exempt from this section until July 1, 2039. That's the 15 years, which really, if you think it out, is more than 16 years because it's 15 years after July 1, 2024. Part B is the Public Service Commission shall establish an appropriate compensation system to regulate the rates, terms, and conditions of small customer generators by electric utilities for electricity produced by small customer generators that are first operational on or after July 1, 2024. That's where it goes to the utility system. The compensation system shall provide for just and reasonable terms and conditions. The PSC will be here and they'll be able to explain what that means, but that is the legal gold standard where you have to balance the interests of all the customers, the utility generator, and the utilities itself. And then, Madam Chairwoman, Part C is about cooperative utilities. Cooperative utilities in Wyoming are not directly rate regulated. We passed a bill several years ago that allowed them to be excused from ordinary rate regulation. And so they're not under the purview, I apologize, purview of the Public Service Commission in the ordinary sense. However, there is a provision in the law that allows for customers to complain if necessary and bring them under the purview of the PSC. So Part C is about the cooperative utilities, and it's kind of extensive about them because we had to figure out a way to bring them in so that but give them flexibility. listen, Madam Chairwoman, I'm first one to say cooperative utilities have different ways of approaching things. Where Representative Storer lives, the utility co-op has a different outlook on the world than on co-ops in other places. And so this would give them that flexibility to set these rates. And I think it's a good balance. So we can talk more about the cooperative utilities, but that takes us over through page 3 into the rest of the language, which is kind of conforming languages with respect to definitions. So I'm on, and we can come back to the co-ops, and I'm sure we probably will, but for right now, Madam Chairwoman, I'm on page 4, 3716-101. The old language with respect to the definition of net metering is on line 12, Romanet 7. It says net metering means measuring the difference between the electricity supplied by an electric utility and the electricity generated by a customer generator operating before July 1, 2024, that is fed back to the electric utility over the applicable billing period. Then we're going to have a new definition, and the whole thing was broken up. And so Romanet 8 says a small customer generator means a person operating a facility for the production of electrical energy that, and there's some other requirements there, but it's basically tells what kind of energy that is. So you see where we split out net metering and the customer generator. That's really an important piece. And that was a piece that the previous work by the Corporations Committee hadn't dialed that in right. And these are better terms, and it makes more sense. And page 5, top of the page, this is very important. A person acting as a small customer generator under this act shall not be considered a public utility. They're not, the rates, they're not in any sense a public utility. Now, there are larger installations of things like solar and wind that come under the purview of the Public Utility Commission, but these are not considered public utilities. So here's what an electric utility has to do, 3716-102. An electric utility shall offer to make available to each of its eligible small customer generators an energy meter that is capable of registering the flow of electricity in 2 directions, may install 1 or more additional meters to monitor the flow of electricity in each direction. And Romanet 3, except as otherwise provided in this paragraph, shall not charge a small customer generator any fee or charge that would increase the small customer generator's minimum monthly charge to an amount greater than that of other customers to the electric utility in the same rate class as the small customer generator. This was our previous law that said if you have net metering, you have to charge the same monthly charge to everyone. We're maintaining that exact amount requirement for all of the grandfathered people till July 1st, 2039. But we're going to say that doesn't necessarily apply to the customer generators that are come about after July 1, 2024. We don't know whether they will or not. We're going to let the Public Utility Commission come up with just and reasonable rates. And then so the
Senator,
calculation.
Can I just interrupt you for a moment?
Yes.
Page 5, line 14, the stricken language says may at its own expense and with written consent of the customer generator install 1. So with this stricken language, would that mean that the small generator has to pay that expense for the additional meters?
So, Madam Chairwoman, if it's a grandfathered customer, they'd have the same terms. If it's a non-grandfathered customer, I think the Public Utility Commission will have to work that out. And they look at things like if a customer imposes additional costs on the system, they may allow for recovery of those costs so that other customers aren't impacted. That's very typical. And you see that with big customers I'm not sure whether the utilities care much about that provision. That's a purist kind of position from my standpoint. They can address whether that really is a big deal to them. In the future, when we have compensation arrangements that might be based on how much is produced and how much is consumed, it might be more important than just knowing the netting out basis to know when certain electricity is produced and when certain electricity is consumed. That's why you might need more than one meter. And the reason is electricity produced at different times is a very different animal. When my house is just cranking out solar energy from the rooftop installations in the summer, and the utility's having to buy it at retail rates, unfortunately, the utility has alternative solar energy available at extremely low rates, maybe less than 2 cents, and they might be paying me 10 cents because the industrial scale solar, they're incredibly cheap and they produce at the same time the sun's shining on my house. So that's why you might need to break that down a little bit.
Thank you.
I hope that was helpful, Madam. And then the calculation requirements, there's some language not there, but that's that the existing small customer generators, which means anybody up to July 1, 2024. So it's not really existing. There'll be a lot of people getting new systems. That's that method. All 3716-104 is safety and compliance with electrical codes and things like that. Whether you can attach things to the network or not, and who's responsible for what costs. Section 4 is non-codified, but it says the public, and I'm on page 8, the Public Service Commission of Wyoming shall conduct public hearings related to the implementation of the compensation system for electricity produced from small customer generation facilities first operational on or after July 1st, 2024, and shall adopt rules necessary to implement the system as provided not later than April 1st, 2024. So they've got to come up with their rules for the non-grandfathered systems by April 1st, 2024. That was kind of a compromise date to see how they could do it. And then the next sentence is about the cooperatives, and any cooperative electric utility that is exempt from retail rate regulation by the Public Service Commission under Chapter 17, Title 37 of this Wyoming statutes shall adopt rates, terms, and conditions to compensate small customer generators as provided WS 3716-105. And they're to adopt those rules and the rates at the same time, April 1st, 2024. The act is immediate, not because it has any impact to be immediate, but it does give the Public Utility Commission a chance to start that rulemaking process.
Okay.
And the only amendment I have was that the old language on the catch title, lines 4, 5, and 6, where it says, well, it actually starts on 3, authorizing the Public Service Commission to authorize a different calculation of net energy if energy is being subsidized by other customers. We're changing to the rate standard that was adopted in the Senate, and it's a good change. Authorizing the Public Service Commission to establish rates, terms, and conditions on a just and reasonable basis. And that's a conforming amendment to the change we made to the body of the bill in the Senate. I think it gives a better understanding of what the bill's about as we adopted the just and reasonable standard. I'm sorry it takes so long. I'm happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Vice Chairman Western.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Chairman Case, so I'm trying to make sure I'm understanding this correctly in broad kind of macro terms.
Sure.
You're saying that these net metering customers are getting too good a deal, that the energy they're selling back into the grid is at retail rates, when the utilities are selling them their retail rates based on their cost basis. You're saying that if this we're going to make it have a fair commercial transaction, then they need to sell us their electricity generated at their cost basis, which is obviously much different. Or am I understanding that correctly?
Madam Chairwoman.
Senator.
Thank you. You're on the right track. So I think the fair standard for the utility and for the rest of the other customers is the cost of the alternative power that's available. I think I mentioned in an example that in the summertime, solar energy is very prevalent in the United States of America, especially in the Southwest and in the Western power grid. But it's only prevalent when the sun is shining, of course. But those rates are on what utilities call an avoided cost basis. That would be the rate they could They could buy that electricity if it were available at, say, 2 cents. But they're forced to pay 10 cents on the net metering basis because they're giving the retail rate to the rooftop producers. It's even compounded worse, Representative Western, because the rates that are, the electricity that's produced by the rooftop customers, utility can't curtail it. It can't not take the rates. So in essence, that comes into the grid, reduces the need for other services. And then we have solar providers, industrial scale solar, that are saying, please take our power, please take our power. The price is going down. It's now 1 cent. And the utility goes, can't take anymore. We don't have room on our system to take it. So by signaling at the net retail basis, we actually forego all these better opportunities for all the utility customers. The opposite is kind of true in the winter, when the utility may have, when there's no wind on the system and it's nighttime or cloudy, the utility may have to scramble to crank up plants, and they cost a lot of money. They might cost 15 cents a kilowatt hour to run. That's a made up number. But yet, so they have to produce and buy that to give that power to the small customer generator to go with the net metering that we had before. So it's compounds on both ends. That's in addition to the price distortion of the fixed cost that we talked about earlier. So you're on the right track.
Quickly, everybody.
Sorry, Madam Chairwoman, just my one and only follow-up is this, that if we're basing the cost, of the electricity rendered based off the cost basis of the infrastructure, wouldn't it, instead of using the next best alternative methodology for evaluation of what they want to buy it for, wouldn't it make more sense to say, well, what's your cost basis for your solar installations, all that stuff, and we'll base it off of that. Again, if we're using the, pricing the product based off cost methodology.
Senator Case.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairwoman. I think maybe this would be a good question for the Public Service Commission. You might think that's fair for you based on your own cost. I ought to at least get my cost. But the trouble is there's an opportunity cost loss because the network, the system could have bought very cheap electricity and all of your fellow customers are paying for that. So you can ask the commission about whether that's just and reasonable or not.
Representative Larson.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So just want to make sure I'm understanding this right. So the way it's been explained makes me think that that residential customers who are using or producing the electricity, they cost the utility more than maybe a large producer of electricity, like an industrial site or something.
Senator.
Madam Chairwoman, it's probably not like that, but they are probably using the utility when they need it, when they're not producing electricity, to a large extent, probably the same as everybody else. But yet, because of the net metering practice, they're not contributing as much as your neighbors here are to the fixed costs. So they kind of get a special deal that we recognize and want to give them for 15 years.
Any other questions from the committee or the senator? Stay close by.
I will, I will,
Public service folks?
I've got some handouts that are that amendment I talked about.
Okay.
I'll give it to yours.
Give it to Barb.
Yeah.
So once again, I'm going to ask that everyone be brief. We're down to 43 minutes.
I'll move my stuff. I'm terribly sorry.
What's that? 53.
Hi, Mr. Petrie. Good afternoon. Good to see you.
Thank you for joining us today. If you could introduce yourselves and who you're with.
Madam Chairwoman, I'm Chris Petrie. I'm Chairman of the Wyoming Public Service Commission. With me today is John Burbridge, who is our Chief Counsel. And I'm going to observe your brevity encouragement as much
great.
as I can. I think Senator Case did a great job of explaining the mechanics of this bill and the background. There have been various discussions in recent years about the apparent existence of some level of subsidy because of the way the net metering system works today. That's not a settled matter, and it's not something that the commission has heard in a contested case proceeding under the APA, but the information that we have seen does definitely suggest, and the mechanism of how net metering works and the way that rates are structured suggests that in fact there probably are some subsidies present in the current system. The section that was pointed out, 3716-102, that prohibits any additional charges for net meters is something of an obstacle under the commission's regular business to make any adjustment. It doesn't allow a utility to come into us and suggest that they have a subsidy problem and that it might be cured by any additional fee charged to net meters. I understand the task that's assigned to the Public Service Commission here is to engage in a hearing process and develop a system and implement rules that would apply to net meters that begin their activity after July 1st, 2024. That's a reasonably challenging timeframe, but I think workable for the commission. This is the kind of work that the commission does. It's essentially a rate setting process and designed to establish just and reasonable rates for future net meters while maintaining the status quo for existing net meters. And just as an aside, I think we've got somewhere around 1 or 1.5% of customers are engaged in net metering. Another, I guess, a response to some of the discussion is that net meters are limited in size, or as they would be called if this bill were passed, small customer generators. There's a limitation on the size, and it's 25 kW nameplate installation. A typical residential customer using about 750 kilowatt hours a month would be probably in the 5 to 7 kilowatt system capacity size to offset all their usage. So I have a pretty good idea about what we would be required to do here, and just and reasonable rates are the goal of that process that's laid out. Just and reasonable rates, if you boil it all the way down as far as you can, essentially means that the customer who causes a cost on the system pays in their rates sufficiently to cover those costs, so that one type of customer, one size of customer is not paying an unduly greater share of the cost of operating the system than their neighbor or some other type of customer. That's, as I said, what we focus on constantly, and I think that we understand what our assignment would be here. I do want to give you just one a simple but I think helpful example. If a net metering customer today installs just the right size of system, say it's 6 kilowatts, and that system through the course of the year is just sufficient to prevent them from buying any retail priced electricity from the utility, but also doesn't produce excess that the utility ends up buying at the end of the year, then if there is any payment for fixed costs that the utility incurs that is collected through the normal 750 kilowatt hour per month customer on an incremental basis as a small part of the price of each kilowatt hour, then they would have avoided making those contributions to the fixed costs to the tune of 750 kilowatt hours times 12 months times whatever the portion of the volumetric charge for a kilowatt hour is at that particular utility. So hopefully that's a helpful example. And with that, I'd be happy to address any questions, Madam Chairwoman.
Any questions?
Yeah.
Oh, Representative Singh.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My question is how, for those months during the wintertime when generation is not, at maximum capacity, how much stress is this contributing to our electric grid?
Go ahead.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative, at this time, like I said, there's only about 1% or 1.5% of residential customers that are engaged in this activity. So now, I would say that it is not a significant strain that this arrangement is placing on the bulk power system or the electric grid or the system of any of our distribution utilities in the state. However, and as you can probably gather just by living in the world, this is gathering steam somewhat, and so I would not expect at all that the number of customers participating in small customer generation or net metering arrangements would do anything but increase and perhaps accelerate.
Do you have a follow-up? Okay. Any other questions? Representative Storr.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Thank you, Chairman Petrie. One question, I'm just trying to align what you just said with regarding just the PSC's job in terms of fairness. And making sure that, one customer isn't unduly burdened more than their neighbor. But I'm trying to square that with what we heard from Senator Case about the fact that the fixed costs aren't covered by the monthly rates necessarily. And so in some ways, we do subsidize people who are either smaller users or lower on the economic scale with large providers. I'm just trying to understand those two ideas and how they aren't in conflict with each other.
Mr. Petrie.
Madam Chairwoman, Representative Storr, the rates that the Public Service Commission sets, none of them are perfect from customer to customer because every customer has some difference in their characteristics. They may be further from the utility's big facilities. And so if you did a perfect job, you'd have a different rate for every customer depending on how many miles or feet of wire was necessary to serve them. And you might have different rates on the basis of what their usage patterns were. If they always used their power in the middle of the night when nobody else needed it, then they might get a lower rate. Some of that is done, but the rates now, by and large, anticipate some consistency within a customer class for the way that they use the power and when they use the power. And so residential rates are generally speaking, they're sort of set on the idea that every household is going to use about 700, there's going to be an average or a typical user that's about 750 kilowatt hours a month for a house. And so that there is imperfection, because if I use 400 and he uses 900, well, he's going to pay more of those incremental contributions to fixed costs than he might if it was a perfect rate system. And then I would sort of like a not very successful net metering customer get away without making all the contributions that would go with 750 kilowatt hours of consumption. So there's not exactness or precision in rate making because it's done by class rather than individual customers. What you have with a small customer generator or net meter is going to be a tendency to deviate on the under consumption side. So when you have a utility that is depending on the volumetric rates to recover their fixed charges, you'll fall short. So if there's just a few, it's in the big picture, not that terrific a problem, but as the numbers grow and the activity increases, then it'd be a growing problem with the subsidy.
Thank you.
Any follow-up?
Just one.
Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. So you said this is net metering customers are about 1 to maybe 1.5% of residential customers in the state. What is the percentage of residential customers overall as a percent of total users in Wyoming? Does that make sense?
Mr. Petrie? you're the-
Madam Chairwoman, that's perhaps a number that I should have, Representative. I don't have that. I know that it varies fairly dramatically by utility. For example, Rocky Mountain Power has an extremely high amount of industrial load, and that makes the residential load something pretty small, maybe 20% or something of their load. I think if you looked at some of the cooperatives, they would have a higher percentage in their customer base of residential customers and perhaps no industrial customers in some cases.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions? Okay, thank you so much. Any other comments? from you?
Nope,
Good.
thank you.
Okay, if you would kind of stay close, that would be good. So at this point, we have about 40 minutes left in our meeting. Who's here to testify in favor of this bill? Okay, why don't you all come up? Are there any online in favor? Can we ask that, Barb? Okay. So David, if you would come up, and Sean, if you would come up. So we're going to give each of you 3 minutes because we're in a time frame. David, if you would like to join at the table, and Sean, if you would like to join at the table. So if you would state your name and who you're with.
Madam Chairwoman, my name is Denise Parrish, and I'm just a retired public citizen. At this point, although I should in fairness tell you that I spent more than 40 years in the business of public utility regulation. So I have a fairly good understanding of how this process works. And I'm here in favor of the bill for this reason, is that this has been debated in newspapers, before legislative committees, and in hallways. I got yelled at church the other day about my position on this. And so I think it's time to bring this issue to a neutral expert party, and that's the Public Service Commission. The Public Service Commission has expertise in this. It has the ability to take testimony from all parties who are interested. It knows how to dissect that evidence. I am neither for or against renewables. I am neither for or against coal and existing resources. In fact, I believe that a mix of resources is good. So I am not here against renewables, but I just think that the existing law hamstrings the commission from dealing with this issue. It's the only thing in the law that hamstrings the commission relative to looking at the equitability of these rates. And so I'm here to support taking this issue, settling it, letting the evidence sort itself out, and let the commission decide this matter. Thank
Ms.
you.
Parrish. So we'll just move down the line. You'd introduce yourself and who you're with.
Okay. Yes, Madam Chairwoman, members of the committee, my name is Rick Kaysen. I represent Rocky Mountain Power. And with your direction, ma'am, I will go rapidly and shortly, if I may.
Rapidly and shortly, that's
Okay.
the word of the day.
There it is, okay. Rocky Mountain Power has worked with self-generating customers for many years. It's nothing new. It's been out there for quite a while. We are not opposed to solar installations or any other type of customer-generated power. There's been statements that that have been made but that is not true. As I mentioned, we've been working with those folks for years. You heard earlier, and I think this is important from the Public Service Commission, that when just and reasonable rates are set, they're set by class, residential, commercial, and industrial. And what that boils down to is what does it cost to serve that class of customer, and what should be the appropriate rate for the utility to recover its costs. So I think that's a very important part of this as well. Really, and it kind of, to sum this up, at the end of the day, all we're asking for is for customers, whether they're a net metering customer or a non-net metering customer, is to pay the rates that are justified and reasonable for those. And by doing that, then again, we don't have cost shifting or cost crossovers or anything like that. I'm paying for exactly what I should get. There is a disparity as you heard earlier, as far as what is charged and what the benefit is for a net metering customer. If I may, to Representative Stoer's question with regards to the number of residential customers and the total picture, at least for Rocky Mountain Power, 78% of our total customers are residential customers. So again, would ask for your favorable consideration to move this bill forward for the further discussion, so that it does not get to a larger problem as we have seen happening in other states. So the principal question is, again, not necessarily about cost and what the subsidization cost might be, but is it okay for a non-metering customer to help a net metering customer, excuse me, is it okay for a non-net metering customer to help out a net metering customer? With that, ma'am, try to answer questions members of the committee may have.
Thank you. I think I'm going to save, Ms. Parrish, if you would come back up. I think I'm going to save questions after you've all spoken. So Mr. Taylor, if you would.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. My name is Sean Taylor, Executive Director of the Wyoming Rural Electric Association. We represent 11 distribution cooperatives across the state of Wyoming. We cover 75% of the landmass. We are in support of this bill, and we have been in the past, simply from the aspect of let the experts figure out. We argue back and forth, is there a subsidization, is there not a subsidization? Is it going to harm rooftop solar, is it not going to harm rooftop solar? And we all have our own positions. Everybody in this room have our own positions. So why not let the folks at the Public Service Commission figure it out for these folks, investor-owned utilities? A quick Co-op 101. We are nonprofit. We are owned by our members. So anybody who's a customer of a co-op is a member owner of our co-op. Representative Stoer, for example, you're a member of Lower Valley Energy, you're a co-owner or part owner of that. We are nonprofit, so at the end of every year, whatever margins we have left over, we return back to our owner, to our member owners. So we have no what's the word I'm looking for? Need or want to overinflate any of our rates for any of our customer classes, because at the end of the day, if we make a bunch of money off of overinflating rates, we just give it back. And we've consistently argued that a rate is a rate is a rate, whether it's a irrigation rate, a large industrial rate, or a net metering rate. And back in 2006, 2007, Senator Case pointed out, we were successful in getting a bill passed and signed into law that allowed us to opt out of rate regulation by the Public Service Commission. And we just didn't do it willy-nilly. We went to we had to have a vote at our annual meeting with all of our members, or a majority of our member owners, and say, we are petitioning to get out from under the Public Service Commission because we are self-governed, we are self-regulated for rates. Like I said, we don't overinflate rates for profit margin. And every co-op that was eligible, there is one up in the northeast corner of the state that wanted to remain subject to rate regulation by the Public Service Commission. The 10 others all took it to their membership, and they all overwhelmingly voted to get out from under rate regulation of the Public Service Commission, because they understood our structure, our business model. And I've said this ad nauseum, and I'll say it again here. I'm very proud of the fact that since every one of our co-ops got out of rate regulation, and there is, as Senator Case pointed out, there is under current statute a complaint process. First, it goes, if somebody has a complaint with a rate, they go to the board of directors and the management of the co-op. If they're not happy about that, they can take it to the Public Service Commission. I'm happy to say, since we got out in 2006 or 7, we haven't had one case go all the way to the Public Service Commission. We've got a handful that have gone to the board and the management of their co-op, their local co-op, and they've walked away understanding the way the rates were set. So it's never gotten to that point. And we feel that we can do the same for net metering customers or small customer generators. A rate is a rate. And if I can get to the amendment real quick, I did offer an amendment
Okay,
to you all.
we have an
to
amendment.
LSO. And I'm gonna have to amend the amendment because I forgot about one section, but it's pretty simple. The amendment it starts on page 2, line 23. After the word section, put a period. And then strike the rest of that line. And then strike all of page 3. And the reason for this, and this was the Senate amendment, the reason for this is because a lot of this already spells out what we do in current statute in terms of complaint by a member owner. So we didn't feel like we needed to have it in here, as well as it was a little too prescriptive telling us, since we're not rate regulated, we didn't feel like it needed to tell us when we had to set new rates for small customer generators. We'll do it if we think it makes sense for all of our members. We will adjust our current net metering rate, and if we call it a small generator rate, that's fine. But we felt that was a little too prescriptive. And because of that, on the last page, and this is not in the handout that I gave you, I apologize, I forgot about this section. But on page 8, line 10, after 2024, strike the remainder from line 10 to 15 for the same reason that I just explained. And with that, Madam Chairman, I'm happy to answer questions once you get to it.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Mr. Bush, and I believe that you have a handout for us.
Correct, Madam Chairman. David Bush with Black Hills Energy. You all just got a handout from me. I won't repeat everything that's on there. I do want to stress again, as my colleagues and Ms. Parrish has pointed out, the legislation does not ban, phase out, or in any way prevent small customer generation moving forward. If you have goals for your family and your home to have solar or wind, you can still do it. What we're asking is that the experts at the Public Service Commission be the one to decide what those rates are for the rest of us. I think you've heard enough information today to realize the complexity of this issue and how complicated it gets. Rate making is not something that's very easy to do. So we think the Public Service Commission is the right place for this. They do all the other rates for all the other classes in the state. This net metering is the only rate that's laid out in statute. The rest of them are done by the Public Service Commission. On the handout, I really wanted to show, there's been questions about the growth and about the penetration so far. The graph, I think, shows the growth that we've seen here in Cheyenne in the past few years, rather remarkably. 2018 to 2023, we've added 806 systems. 2004 to 2017, we had 126 systems. Since this bill went through the Senate in January 20th, we've added 22 more systems to Cheyenne. Since we pulled the numbers, we were at 6 then, we're at 28 now. So the growth in Cheyenne, at least, is pretty stark. Part of that is also listed on the sheet. There's a lot of federal tax credits that are available. 30% investment tax credit, thanks to the, I always forget what it is, Inflation Reduction Act, such as that is. And there's another $7 billion in grants coming from the Biden administration, also geared towards rooftop solar. Those kinds of monies are going to be what keeps the solar installation industry alive. It's not going to be whether or not we have a state subsidy, basically. And with that, I heard the alarm go off, so I'll stop.
Thank you, Mr. Bush. Any questions from the committee for any of the panelists here? No, apparently you guys are very thorough. Thank you so much for your testimony. I appreciate it.
Thank you, committee.
Okay, so those that are here to testify against this particular bill, let's have 1, 2, 3, 4 come up. Once again, we're going to hold it to 2 minutes. We have 28 minutes left in our meeting. And so, and we still have to work the bill. So we probably need about 10 minutes for that, possibly. So brevity is key. And please don't repeat what others have said as you testify. Thank you. So we'll start on this end, I guess.
My name is Jennifer Coolidge. I'm from Albany County. I'm a retired U.S. Air Force civil engineer. I would like to provide a little bit about my situation as well as a larger picture regarding net metering. There's been talk recently about one of the reasons why they do not do or don't want to do net metering in Wyoming is due to ratepayers are being subsidized, which is hurting non-net metering ratepayers. I'd like to give you some information with regards to this particular false notion prior to the vote today. Setting aside the idea of electrical utility ratepayers is net metering or non-net metering, some ratepayers live within relatively close proximity to a substation, while others can live 10 to 15 miles away. The customers living close to the substation have a short run of transmission lines, whereas the electrical ratepayer that lives 10 or 15 miles away is utilizing a great deal more of transmission lines to receive their electricity. Yet not only is there no talk about the use of the transmission lines for each customer, but also there's no difference in monthly charges among the total population of the electrical customers per company, save one, how much electricity you actually use each month. So this idea of the subsidy, I mean, this is going on whether we're talking about net metering or non-net metering, because the customers that are far, far away are using up more infrastructure than the customers that are living close by. With regards to net metering electrical ratepayers, when more energy is produced than needed, that energy is sent back to the electrical power co-op or company, but it doesn't travel all the way back to the substation. This extra energy is utilized by any meter along the way towards the substation requesting electricity, such as a neighbor flipping on a light switch, washing clothes, etc. In layman's terms, any extra energy saves the electrical power entity the use of the transmission lines all the way from the substation to my next door neighbors. In this scenario, my extra energy.
Time's up. Oh, and I think, time's up, but I think we get your point.
Okay.
Thank you.
Anyway, thank you, Madam Chairman.
Madam Chairman and representatives, thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Patricia Baldwin, and I am a resident of Laramie County. I have been a resident of Wyoming for just 4 years and have had the pleasure to work in Teton and Park counties. I am opposed to Senate Bill 92, and I have a few statements or questions for you to consider. First of all, is why does this committee have an energy bill to consider? Second is, why has the Wyoming government not embraced renewable through solar or even wind? And the state could learn a valuable lesson from Teton County. Teton County has over 500 solar panels on county buildings providing electricity. Wyoming is 46th in the nation for solar. Without Teton County, we'd probably be 50th. 33 states have mandated net metering. 3 states do not offer net metering. The remainder of the states offer an alternate compensation method. Department of Energy, like Black Hills said, offers technical assistance and oftentimes financial assistance to any person, including tribal communities, a business, or local government that wants to explore or use solar. 39 states participate in community solar programs. That's a bank of solar panels built with a subdivision. Wyoming has renewable resources we are not using. Sunshine and the wind can help energy production and clean air. Let's not follow the Pied Piper over the cliff because we don't have knowledge to make a correct decision. And let's not throw the baby out with the bathwater. Wyoming needs to form a task force or engage the PSC to partner with customers and all utilities to determine a fair price for the resale solar generated electricity back to the utility. Then and only then should the customer generated net metering law be changed. When you read the bill, it has more than just allowing the PSC to do rate changes.
Thank you, Ms. Baldwin.
Thank you.
Moving on, please introduce yourself.
My name is Dick Merklin. I represent the Wyoming Solar Coalition throughout the state, but basically here in Cheyenne, I have approximately 200 members, and I'm working on another 200 throughout the state. I would like to let you folks know, the 9 of you on this committee, that 6 of you have an extensive amount of solar in your districts. The other 3, you have some. But I'll cut to the chase here. This is a bad bill. Senator Case has run this up the flagpole since 2019 and it's fell flat every time. In his testimony before the Senate Subcommittee, Corporations,
So,
he said this bill is
I believe
is
you
only a
should-
theory.
You should stick to your testimony about your experience. And
What I'm
not-
saying is, he has had theories since 2019, and I've been at every one of these meetings on the solar issue, the net metering issue. Let me cut to the chase. What's being presented to you today is something that was sued by the state of Kansas. State of Kansas and the KCC, which is the Wyoming's Public Service Commission, got together and they started charging solar owners in the state of Kansas a demand rate, a different rate than others paid that didn't have solar. The Supreme Court of the state of Kansas found that that was discriminatory and it was unconstitutional because it wasn't being applied evenly across the board to all users. They made Evergy Utility refund all the monies that they had collected in error because of this decision. That decision was put out in April of 2020. It's in your handouts that I had the LSO give to you. And there's a lot of information in there that you can read and digest. This has been flowing up and down the flagpole one too many times. It needs to die in this committee. It is not a good bill.
Thank you. Your time is up.
Madam Chair and members of this esteemed committee, my name is Jason Bloomberg. I am a physician here in Cheyenne. I have served the people of Wyoming for over 20 years. I also have a home that is powered by wind, sun, and I have on-site battery storage and am a net metering customer. When our home was built by the original owner, they paid to have power lines pulled to that location. They continued to pay to have a transformer until the transformer was paid off. I pay a grid access fee of $44, far more than what was presented earlier today, twice as much actually, because these fixed costs that the utility incurs is actually rolled into the grid access fee. And based on testimony given today, 75% of the land mass has co-ops that could do exactly the same thing. So this bill really only helps, potentially helps somebody in that 25% land mass while disadvantaging the other 75%. Here's the thing. When I have a surplus at the end of the year, it doesn't continue to roll over. It is then turned into cash at a undiscounted wholesale rate of 2.9 cents per kilowatt hours, not the 10 cent per kilowatt hour that was given to you in the hypothetical. I then buy it back at 3.3 times this rate of 9.55 cents. So actually, it gets consumed in a single month and I end up paying on top of that. I pay every month. I am not subsidizing anybody. I, in fact, am subsidizing those other ratepayers in my area. I want to make it clear that this, when it was introduced, when Rick Kaysen testified originally for this, it was the quote, most fair bill there is. We're not California. You're not giving us retail rates back and then having us pay somehow a lower rate. Nobody is reimbursing me my costs for building the infrastructure, maintaining the infrastructure of my system. I absorb all that and still provide power at no more expense than if they bought it from any other source. Thank you.
Thank you, Doctor. Thank you all. Any questions for this particular panel? No? Okay, thank you all. So we are down to 17 minutes. Anybody else that wants to testify in favor that their issue has not been addressed? Okay. I'm sorry, against, against that their issue has not been spoken about. Okay, 1, 2, 3, 4, come on up. Realize that we're trying to get through this bill today. And so this will probably be the last group that we will hear from. 2 minutes. Go ahead.
Stacy Young. I actually work in the nuclear power industry as well as coal and diesel around the country in Hawaii. In my off season, I was looking for something extra to do, so I thought, why not solar? Well, boy, have I learned a lot. I'll try to make this as quickly as possible and just have some quick facts to support some information I'll give you. State Solar Spotlight of Wyoming ranked us 42nd in the total installed solar capacity, which is 145 megawatts. 92 megawatts of that is from the Sweetwater Solar Farm. This solar farm and small-scale solar panels of residential private property provide about 2% of the state's renewable generation, and they mentioned some of that earlier. Looking at the Black Hills customer bills, on average, they pay about 0.1612 cents per kilowatt and are paid back nothing but a mere 0.00938, which actually Cale Case had mentioned. It's actually 1/10 of 1 penny, which is really low. High West, it was already mentioned, High West doesn't actually, it depends on which program you pick, but they do a credit for credit, and at the end of the year, it's gone. It does not roll over, so nobody benefits from that. So Black Hills writes a check, High West doesn't. So this bill, to take 99% profit they make and move it to 100% profit, just doesn't seem right. Power companies spend no money on residential or solar wind maintenance or infrastructure. These people who have solar and wind do all their own maintenance. I think that's a huge benefit to the power companies. From a legislative friend of mine who looked over the bill, he shared with me something that I wanted to share with you guys quickly.
Okay, quickly, 1 point.
Yeah.
Your time's up.
So he looked over the bill and he said this. So this bill completely incentivizes getting renewable energy installed in private property. I would liken it unto going to a restaurant where there's no tables, chairs, pots, pans, plates, silverware, even food. You're required to bring your own food and cook it at the restaurant. Wouldn't you want to go to that restaurant? Haha, sounds like a place you wouldn't want to go. Probably not, almost done. Probably not, but that is exactly what this bill does. It forces you to pay for all infrastructure, give excessive energy freely to the power company, and then authorizes them to charge you a fee simply for having your own electrical system. Oh, it also gives the utility access to your property that violates the Fourth Amendment. So if this bill passes and you came to him and said, would you like to buy solar? He would say, absolutely not. I believe
Time's
without
up.
a doubt that this bill is sick and greedy is what it is.
Good afternoon, Madam Chairman. Sorry, thank you. Good afternoon, Madam Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Era Arno. I represent the Wyoming Outdoor Council. Please vote no. This bill is unnecessary. It's not solving problems that currently exist in our state. The number of net meter residents in Wyoming is small. Currently, rooftop solar generates only about 0.5% of residential electric sales, and it's taken over 20 years to reach this level of saturation. Numerous studies suggest that significant cost shifts from net metering do not occur until the threshold reaches 5 to 10% of residential electric sales. That's roughly 10 to 20 times what we currently have and will take over a decade to achieve. This bill adds huge uncertainty for small business customers. Imagine you're installing rooftop solar or backyard wind systems. With this looming financial uncertainty on the horizon, would you go ahead and make an investment without having any idea what your return would be? I wouldn't. The way this bill is structured leaves so much to be determined by the PSC and rural electric cooperatives. It's difficult to imagine anyone investing in their solar or wind. We're concerned about exempting the rural electric cooperatives, as you see in Section C. The current system of net metering is fair, it's easy to understand, and it applies equally whether you are served by one of the 4 investor-owned utilities or the 18 rural electric cooperatives. Wyoming residents have an equal opportunity and access to net metering because it is guaranteed in statute. If rural cooperatives are exempted from new rates, what will the future for small customer generation look like for this half of the state? What's really important is our opportunity to control how energy is produced. Wyomingites should have the opportunity to pay for, install, and produce their own electricity. Thank you.
Okay, moving down the row.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chairman. My name is Marilyn Ham. I'm a 49-year resident of Cheyenne. The reason we got the solar, we paid over $100,000 for the system. And the reason we got it is my husband is a veteran and he's disabled. And at night he has to run an oxygen machine and the system goes down periodically. I mean, we've all been without lights a time or two. And 3 years ago, it went out for 3 days. But I just wanted to explain that it isn't all just for financial benefit. This bill allows the utility to add an extra charge to rooftop solar buyers and monthly, and the PSC decides the utility is subsidizing rooftop solar. Currently, the base rate is $20 per month for all customers, which pays this cost of running the grid. Keep in mind that rooftop solar owners use a lot less power than regular customers and consequently cause less wear and tear on the grid, but we still pay the full $20 base rate. I think this means that rooftop solar owners are essentially subsidizing the utility and their regular customers, not the other way around. The net metering statute 3716-103 that's currently in effect says the utilities must compensate rooftop solars for their excess power by an amount equal to the utility's filed avoided cost. Mr. Case's bill wants to repeal this requirement because he thinks it's unfair to the utility. Really, every kilowatt hour generated into the grid is a kilowatt hour the utility doesn't have to generate. Thus, my solar system lets them avoid the cost of generating this 1 kilowatt hour. This is called the utility's avoided cost.
Okay, Ms. Ham, your time is up.
Okay, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you.
So my name is Travis Spears. I actually run and own the electric and solar specialist here in Cheyenne. To touch base actually on what she was speaking on is perfect. That cost that the utility is gaining from that is going to feed a commercial building such as the Capitol. The Capitol is being charged currently by Black Hills Energy at probably 15.8 cents a kilowatt hour. As a residential customer, I'm being billed at 12.83 cents a kilowatt hour. So if I'm getting a kilowatt credit for my power that's being produced during the day when I'm not at home using my power, the company credits me if I leave that power on the grid at 2.3 cents a kilowatt. That means they're making 12 cents a kilowatt hour off the power that I'm producing. So I'm subsidizing the utility company. They're making the profits, not us. So I want to look at a couple other things too. Now, there was a lobbyist or a representative for the utility company saying that they had 78% residential customers. That's their entire company. Across US, or across Wyoming, in 2019, they said they had 14% of the residential market made up their $7 billion a year industry. 14%. Now we're talking 1% saturation on the residential market is impacting their $7 billion a year industry. I don't know why we're concerned about those people, right? They spent their own money to invest in their own property to increase their own values. Now, the 25 kilowatt
thank you.
nameplate, why are we giving them 3 minutes and us 2 minutes?
Okay, I mean, if you want this to carry over forever, we can do that, or we can limit testimony.
I have one other point just to make. if you don't mind.
Okay,
If we kick this over to the PSC, I don't feel like that's the right way. And the reason why is because the PSC doesn't have the funds or the ability to continue to go after this if they aren't allocated the funds to do it. We've filed a complaint with the utility company who is going off of a nameplate rating when our net metering agreement states that it is the generational capacity of the system. And the PSC said it would take 8 months to have a hearing to go over it. I also have a handout that's in front of you, if you guys would like to look at that.
okay,
Can you-
we need to carry on. We need to be back at 2 because several of us have bills coming up like,
Well, if you look at
First-
that, can you tell me what the kilowatt hours I got paid out and at what rate? Because that was a complaint that I sent to the PSC a year ago, and that still hasn't been resolved.
Okay.
And that check I just got today.
thank you all. Any questions? Okay. The folks online, we're going to stop public testimony at this point. We've heard from both sides, and I think we've heard adequate information. So those of you that are online, I'm sorry, but we're not going to be able to hear you today, and there are several people in the room that we're not going to be able to hear from today. So I think we will take this back to the committee. So committee, what is your pleasure?
Madam Chairwoman,
Representative Storr.
I'd like to motion that we table the bill.
Okay. Do we know the procedure for that? I'm
Take it.
Do we have a second to tabling?
All right.
Okay. Any other motions?
I'll move the bill.
Okay, Burkhart moves. Any second to that? No, I guess it dies for lack of a second. So I guess that's it then. Thank you, Senator. Thank you, everyone.